It all started with a shriek across the field. "You trained a falcon to attack my drone." Karen screamed, her mascara running, her face twisted like she had swallowed a lemon. I simply tipped my hat and said, "Lady, it's called natural selection." The entire mess began 3 weeks before that showdown, on a morning that smelled like fresh hay and victory. I was sipping black coffee on my porch, watching my chickens peck at a patch of dew-wet grass, when a high-pitched, buzzing noise cut through the calm. At first, I thought it was a wasp or maybe two, but the sound grew sharper. Then, I spotted the shadow dancing across my barn wall. I looked up, and there it was, a sleek black drone hovering like a nosy UFO, its tiny camera lens flicking around, sizing up my property. Now, I've seen plenty in my years as a wildlife rehabilitator. Raccoons with plastic six-pack rings on their necks, a hawk that tried to mate with a garden gnome, even a possum that fainted every time I whistled the Andy Griffith theme. But I had never seen a drone brazenly hover straight into the open window of a barn. I walked across the field, boots crunching on gravel, eyes locked on the drone as it dipped lower toward my barn skylight. That barn wasn't just a place for hay bales and tools. It housed Ember, my pride and joy, a peregrine falcon with a scar across her right wing and an attitude like a Navy SEAL. I had found her 6 months ago, barely alive after someone shot fireworks into her nesting zone. I spent weeks nursing her back to health, and finally, she was regaining her confidence and grace. The barn was her quiet sanctuary, and now it had an uninvited guest. I jogged inside, heart racing. Ember was perched high on her usual post, wings out, clearly agitated. The drone zipped around, its whirring echoing like a wasp in a tin can. It dropped suddenly, hit the barn floor, and skittered across like it was drunk. Sparks flew as it collided with an empty feeder. Ember squawked, took flight, and slammed into the upper beams. She didn't get hurt, thank God, but it was enough to get my blood boiling. By the time I stepped outside, the drone had skittered off back toward the edge of the neighborhood. And there she stood, Karen, arms folded, sunglasses perched atop her platinum beehive, controller in hand like she was commanding a toy army. She was dressed in her usual mix of garden chic and petty authority, a pastel visor, tennis shoes way too white for yard work, and a clipboard tucked under one arm like it granted her divine power. "You're harboring aggressive birds," she barked without greeting. "And that barn doesn't look up to code. Might be a violation." I pointed back toward the barn. "You flew a surveillance drone into my barn. That's trespassing." She smirked. "Not if I'm documenting dangerous wildlife behavior. I have every right to protect the community." I laughed. "Karen, I live outside the HOA. You don't even have jurisdiction over your own dog's haircut." That must have hit a nerve because she narrowed her eyes like I'd insulted her ancestry. She mumbled something about reporting me to animal control and stormed off, her visor bouncing with every furious step. Back inside, I checked the barn. Ember was rattled but unharmed. I tossed her a strip of rabbit meat and whistled softly. She fluttered down to my glove, talons resting just gently enough to show trust, but with the strength that hinted at what she was capable of. I looked at her and said, "Well, girl, looks like we've got a pest problem." Over the next few days, I kept an eye out. Sure enough, the drone came back, this time staying just outside the barn, zipping over the fence line like it was playing chicken. I noticed a new upgrade on it, too, a thermal lens. Karen was doubling down. I considered all the usual responses, calling the sheriff. He'd roll his eyes and say, "Karen again. Filing a complaint?" It would disappear under a stack of HOA nonsense. But then I thought about Ember, how she'd once soared over cliffs, hunted with laser focus, and how now she was being reduced to flinching at the sound of propellers. That night, while grilling a steak and sipping a beer, I watched Ember circle above me in wide, confident arcs. I whistled once and held out my arm. She landed cleanly, light as breath. I looked her in the eye and said, "You ever feel like teaching someone a lesson? See, falcons don't attack out of spite, but they do intercept. They chase. They respond to threats. And drones, as far as you're concerned, are just metal crows with no manners." I spent the next 2 days working on a little experiment. I fitted a custom glove with a tracking ring linked to a frequency-triggered whistle. A bit of training, a few dummy runs with a decoy drone, and Ember was responding with speed and precision I hadn't seen in years. Then came the big one. Karen rolled out with a new rig, bigger, louder, probably more expensive than her car. It took off like a military operation, circling high before descending in a slow spiral toward my barn. She stood at the far end of the field, grinning like she'd already won. But so was I. I stepped out, gave one sharp whistle, an ember shot from the rooftop, cutting through the air like a rocket. The drone spun in surprise, trying to ascend, but it was too late. Ember closed the gap in seconds, dove in a corkscrew, and with a flash of talons boom. Main rotor disabled. The drone wobbled, tumbled, and crashed in a glorious splash into Karen's ornamental koi pond. Karen screamed so loud I swear the chickens laid scrambled eggs. And me? I just tipped my hat and walked back to the barn. Ember landed on the gate behind me, eyes scanning the sky. We had just declared air superiority, and this war was just beginning. The next morning, I woke up to find an envelope duct taped to my mailbox, like it had been delivered by someone who wanted to be both seen and feared. It was from the HOA, even though I wasn't a member. The letterhead alone had more attitude than sense. In bold, aggressive wording, it claimed I was harboring unregistered wildlife, operating an unzoned animal facility, and posed a threat to community tranquility. The kicker? It was signed by none other than Karen, who had clearly traded her clipboard for a personal vendetta. I laughed, tucked the letter into my coat pocket, and went about my morning chores like a man who knew this would only get dumber before it got better. While I shoveled feed into the chicken coops, Ember soared overhead, doing lazy circles above the barn like a sentry. Every time her wings sliced through the sky, I felt a small swell of pride. The way she had taken out that droney, it wasn't just satisfying, it was art. But I knew Karen wouldn't stop there. People like her never take a loss lying down. They regroup, retool, and come back with something shinier, louder, and twice as illegal. By noon, I confirmed my suspicions. My neighbor, Dalia, friendly beekeeper with the social tact of a golden retriever, came trotting up the driveway, waving a flyer. "You see this?" he asked. "She's rallying the HOA to propose annexing your property into their district. Says you're a biological threat." He looked half apologetic, half amused. "I think she called you a rogue falconer." I snorted and took the flyer from him. Sure enough, Karen had printed out grainy photos of Ember mid-flight, probably from her doomed drone footage, and plastered them with nonsense captions like, "Is this safe for our children?" and "Unauthorized predator training." It looked like a cross between a tabloid and a bad conspiracy blog. I couldn't decide whether to laugh or build a moat. That night, I sat in the barn with Ember perched beside me, stroking her back with a gloved hand. The barn had become our safe zone, her sanctuary. And now this HOA queen pin was trying to storm the gates. It was personal now. I leaned back in the hay and started mapping out a plan, not for revenge, but for poetic justice. First, I needed to know what I was really up against. So, I did what any red-blooded man with a grudge and a Wi-Fi connection would do. I started investigating online records, property databases, HOA charters, you name it. Turns out, Karen had recently submitted a grant request on behalf of the HOA. The proposal? A luxury bird-watching park complete with a viewing gazebo, butterfly gardens, and a walking path. And wouldn't you know it, the blueprint for the park just happened to overlap with the west side of my land. She wasn't just spying. She was trying to build on it. I stared at my screen, stunned, for about 5 seconds. Then I burst out laughing. Karen wasn't afraid of Ember, she was obsessed with her. She wanted to steal my land, slap a park on it, and then turn Ember into some kind of feathered mascot for her HOA nature fantasy. Suddenly, everything made sense. The drones, the noise complaints, the wildlife accusations. She was playing chess badly, but chess nonetheless. That's when the idea hit me. If she wanted to keep snooping, let her. But I'd control what she saw. I set up a decoy station inside the barn. I placed an old bird cage in the middle, wired it with blinking lights, and added a sound loop of generic falcon calls. Then I taped up a fake sign that read, "Private Falcon Rehabilitation. Biohazard. Entry restricted." I even set up a motion-triggered fan that blew feathers across the room whenever someone entered. It looked like something straight out of a B-movie science lab. Then I waited. The next afternoon, the humming came back. This time, the drone was bigger, beefier, and equipped with more gadgets than a spy movie prop. It hovered above the barn roof, dipped low, and began inching toward the skylight again. But what Karen didn't know was that Ember was already perched and ready, trained now to chase specific shapes and respond to the pitch of my new falcon whistle. I gave a quick blow into the whistle. Ember launched into the air like a missile. The drone tried to climb, but she outpaced it in seconds. With one elegant twist, she slammed into it, sending it spinning end over end. It plummeted and crashed into Karen's ornamental fountain in her front yard, splattering decorative koi all over her porch. I couldn't make that up if I tried. From across the field, I saw her storm out of her house, arms flailing, screaming something incoherent about federal aviation rules and bird crimes. I stood at my fence, embers circling above, and simply raised my hand in a friendly wave. She flipped me off so aggressively, she almost lost her visor. I figured that would be the end of it. Surely even Karen couldn't push further without embarrassing herself. But the next morning, I received a stack of envelopes rubber banded together and shoved into my mailbox so violently the door hung crooked. Noise complaints, wildlife endangerment citations, even a letter from someone claiming to be with the Greater Suburban Avon Oversight Board, which I later found out was just Karen's nephew pretending to be an official. She was throwing everything she had at me. Still, I wasn't rattled. Ember was thriving. I had neighbors like Dale quietly cheering me on. And now I had the beginnings of a legal trail that could show harassment and fraud. I called a friend of mine, Jess, a wildlife officer who had once interned with me years ago, and invited her over for coffee. When she saw what Karen was pulling, she promised to help. Her badge might not be federal, but she knew her way around animal law, and that made her 10 times more dangerous to Karen than a falcon. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky in burnt oranges and blues, Ember flew a slow circle above the barn while I leaned against the fence, arms crossed, watching Karen's house with a grin. She wanted a bird show? I'd give her one she'd never forget.